And broadcasting now. Okay.
Give me just a sec, Andy. I'm just pulling up our agenda for the evening. 6:23. Okay. Good evening, members of the Zoning Board of Appeals, ladies and gentlemen in attendance. This is the City of Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals for the agenda hearing evening of June 23rd, 2020. We are scheduled and noticed to start at 7 p.m. My name is Rob Ciampetti. I'm the chairman. This is a very short meeting this evening, but we'll go through the formalities of calling the roll, the business meeting, approval of our minutes from our last meeting, which was June 9th. And then we'll go into our one substantive matter, which is part of the business meeting, a request for minor modification of 14 Gloria Street. After which we will enter the public hearings for purposes in this evening's instance only of soliciting from the members of the board a motion at the request of the applicant to continue the matter of 460 8th Street, a special permit for nonconformities to the meeting of, Andy, is it 720? Was it the meeting of 728 that they were asking?
714.
714. All right. Thank you. So what we will do is go through our roll call, and I think the easiest thing is for me to just go through our members, and if you could respond by simply saying here, that'll be great. So calling the roll of the Newburyport Zoning Board of Appeals, Stephen Delisle.
Here.
Mr. Mark Moore.
Here.
Let's see. Miss Rachel Webb. Oh, is Rachel not?
She's not present with us at the moment.
Yeah, Rachel couldn't make it tonight, Rob.
Oh, okay. Bear with me just a sec. Sorry, guys. I'm just having, everything just went blank on my screen. Give me a quick sec. And
sure.
Okay. Ed Cameron has left the board. His seat is now vacant.
I'm still here.
Oh, you are.
This is my last one.
My apologies. I thought the last one was your last one. That's great.
Trying to get rid of me already.
Not at all. So Mr. Ed Cameron.
Here.
Excellent. Rachel Webb is absent. Ken Swanton.
Here.
And Bud Shannon.
Here.
All right. So we have Rob Ciampetti. I'm here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have a full board, and we only need to have 5 voting members. So we have a quorum, and we can proceed in opening the business meeting for this evening. Going to the business meeting, we have before us, members of the board, the approval of the minutes from 6/9. Do we have any comments, changes, modifications, or do we have a motion to approve?
Mr. Chairman, this is Mr. Shagnon. I had one slight change. It's probably just grammatical. It's page 2, second sentence. I think it says Lisa Mead represent. It should be either represents or represented.
Okay. Any other comments or notes or revisions to the minutes?
It's a better catch than I had. I have none.
Anything else? Do we have a motion to approve the minutes for the meeting of 6/9/2020?
This is Mr. Moore, so moved.
Mr. Cameron, second.
Okay, the motion's made by Mr. Moore and seconded by Mr. Cameron. Calling the roll, and just respond in, if you want to respond in the affirmative by saying aye. Mr. Cameron.
Aye.
Mr. Moore.
Aye.
Mr. Delisle.
Aye.
Mr. Swanton.
Aye.
Mr. Shannon.
Aye.
Rob Ciampetti, I vote aye. That's 6 in the affirmative. The motion carries, and the minutes are adopted. So moving to the next item, the first substantive matter on our business meeting, the only substantive matter for this evening, request for minor modification of 14 Gloria Street, matter 2020-022. May we hear from the applicant on the minor modification?
And we have Kevin Legassi here this evening to speak to us.
Very good. Mr. Legassi, if you please.
Yes, good evening. This is
Good evening.
Kevin Legassi of 14 Gloria Street. And I'm requesting a minor modification to add a roof deck to my home on 14 Gloria Street. The roof deck is a 16-foot 5-inch by 12-foot 6-inch deck that will be located on the southeast corner of my home. The access to the deck is via a spiral staircase that is located on the southeast corner of my home. This staircase, its location, I had reviewed with the Conservation Commission in December and received approval. You should find that location on the zoning board drawings that I submitted. And you should find an overview of the roof deck and drawings that I submitted to the zoning board last week. End of description.
Okay, Mr. Legassi, thank you. This is Chairman Rob Champetti again. We have all of the materials you submitted, so we're able to see that contemporaneously, simultaneously with your presentation. Was there anything else, sir, you wanted to share with us?
No, there really isn't. That was it. I had applied for the building permit, and at that point was made aware that it did require the minor modification in a review with the zoning board. That's it, Mr. Champetti.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Legassi. We'll have maybe some questions for you, and then we can take up the matter and move things along. Do we have? Are there any questions from members of the ZBA with respect to Mr. Legassi's proposal?
Yeah, this is Mark Moore. I have a question. I think it was mentioned, Mr. Legassi, that you had approached the abutters and explained what you were planning to do here. I don't see any letters. I don't think you have letters. I just wondered who you spoke to and.
That's correct. I have spoke to all of my neighbors on Gloria Street, and I've also spoke to the abutter on the adjacent street, Flora Street, that backs up to my property, and I received no negative comments, and actually received a welcome to see that in the neighborhood.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions from the members of the board for Mr. Legassi? Mr. Legassi, I have a question for you again. It's Rob Champetti. I see that you're using a spiral staircase to access the roof deck.
Yes.
Is that something you're having fabricated? Is that something have you contracted locally for that, or is that? I'm just curious about the materials and how we're getting up there and such. This is purely a curiosity question.
Yes, I am actually having it fabricated. It's from a staircase company to be fabricated out of galvanized steel. My specifications, are really to make sure that it meets code, residential code, and that the standoffs are at the appropriate positions to both anchor it on my home and to anchor it on the helical pile that I'll place beneath it to support it.
I appreciate that info, Mr. Lagasse. And if you'll indulge me a sec, do you happen to know, I'm just curious, the company that's fabricating that for you?
It's actually Stairways Inc., and they're out of Houston, Texas. They actually will fabricate it and ship it assembled, with my intent to use a crane to lift it vertical and place it on the pile to anchor it to the back of the house.
Great. I appreciate you sharing that. We're just curious. We've seen more and more of these on the island, and I'm curious where they're coming from. And now we know. And thank you. Any other questions from the members of the board?
Yes, this is Stephen Delisle. I'd like to just follow up on Mr. Moore's question with respect to the comments of the abutters. I was just wondering, Mr. Lagasse, since this is an old, a very old permit that we're being asked to modify, and there's really no notice being given to the abutters. So I'm just wondering if you could just give the addresses and the names of the people that you spoke to, just so we as a board can be, satisfied that there was some level of notice given to the abutters. Not that notice is per se required on a minor modification. It's just that with the incredibly long lapse in time, it becomes a little bit of a different beast, I think.
Sure, yes. So the abutters that I've had discussions with, notified, are 16 Gloria Street, and that's Neil and Joan Johnston. So if you, I think you have the cursor on the map now, it's right at the end of the right of way. So it's, yeah, that's it. That's 16. I've also discussed with, I believe it's actually 7 Gloria Street. That's across Gloria Street from my home. That's it, correct? And that is Mark in Margan Pine. I've also discussed with the neighbors 12 Gloria Street. So that's a yes. And that is Jim and Nancy Pelletier. And I've also discussed with my neighbors at 5 Gloria Street, and that is Peter and Leah Brandt. And then if you look right behind my house, it's actually on Flora Street. I've discussed with Rosemary Bluen, and I'm trying to think of her number. I want to say, I'm actually not sure her number, address number. Sure. One second. It is actually 12 Flora Street, and that's Rosemary Bluen. And those are the neighbors that I've discussed it with.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you going through that. That is very helpful. I know it's a little tedious, but I appreciate it.
Yes.
Okay. I had a question. This is Ken Swanton.
Yes.
Hey, Kevin, I guess my question is, just, you know what the height of the roof deck is? The drawing doesn't really show it, but do you happen to know when you're standing up there, what the height is?
I do. It is elevation, 1 second here. I gotta pull it from a different drawing. So you are standing at, 1 second. "32 feet 4 inches from the ground level to the peak elevation."
The peak, that's where you're standing, I assume. So, okay,
That's correct, with a 42-inch rail.
okay,
So 32 inch, 2 inches to the peak to ground, and then a 42-inch rail.
okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Legassi. Any other questions? Okay, hearing no further questions from the board, we have before us a minor modification to an existing permit. Do we have any discussion of the board members with respect to whether indeed it is minor, and if so, can be met favorably by the board moving it along to a motion and then a vote?
This is Mark Moore. I'll jump off on some discussion, what I was thinking, and then Mr. Delisle got in some nice detail. I appreciate him asking for that special detail. Our planning department provided some guidance on, if this would qualify as a minor modification. I found it really helpful. When I went down to look at the house, the one thing I did notice was I didn't see a lot of roof decks on this street. So my main concern was that the abutters had been, all on board with this. So it's not likely to cause concern on the part of any abutter if they were, and I have no reason not to believe them, that they're all a thumbs up on this. I don't see it as being a big design change at massing or anything that, if I had been involved on the original, that I would have said, well, everything's fine except this deck. So with the abutters on board, I don't see a huge change to the footprint of the house or how it looks. So with the thumbs up from everyone, I guess I'm saying I think I can consider this minor.
Okay, Mr. Moore, thank you. Mr. Cameron, what say you, sir?
Yeah, I would agree with Mr. Moore. Just taking a look at the original 2002 or whenever it was, those plans and the current roof deck overview. I was just comparing the east elevation, and I think it's it's visible, but I don't really think it's going to have an impact. And I do appreciate the proponent reaching out to those neighbors and that amount of specificity. So I would consider it minor.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron. Mr. Delisle.
I would agree with Mr. Moore and Mr. Cameron. I would consider this to be a minor modification as well.
Okay, Mr. Delisle, thank you. Mr. Swanton.
I too agree with my colleagues that this is an acceptable minor modification.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Swanton and Mr. Chandon.
Am I voting, Mr. Chairman?
Well, you're part of the deliberations, but since it's a minor modification, you wouldn't be voting, but the deliberations are fair game.
Okay, great, thank you. No, I don't have a problem with it. I think this is minor again, and I agree with my colleagues.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Shannon. And I agree with everything that's been said as well. It's minor. It seems in keeping and in massing and scale with everything there. And we likely would have considered it. I would have considered it favorably had it been part of the initial proposal. Do we have, closing that part of the minor modification hearing, do we have a motion to approve?
This is Mr. Moore. I'll make a motion to deem this request a minor modification for 14 Gloria Street, 2020-022, and vote to approve.
Mr. Cameron, second.
Okay, motion's made by Mr. Moore and seconded by Mr. Cameron. Mr. Delisle,
Yes.
Mr. Cameron,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That is 5 in the affirmative. The motion carries and the minor modification is approved. Mr. Legassi, good luck to you, sir.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, what should I expect for, I guess, an approval notice? Would it just be in the building permit, or?
This is Andy. I can address that.
I'll defer to
What you'll get is a certificate from the board that shows in writing that the board has approved this as of this date. The proposed plans will be referenced in that certificate.
Great. Very good.
Thank you, Andy.
I
Okay.
appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. You as well. Okay, so that closes the business meeting of the ZBA hearing for this evening. Moving to the only matter on our public hearing section, which is a motion to continue. We have the matter of Ryan McShara, Red Barn Architecture, 468th Street, matter 2020-030, special permit for nonconformities, seeking to demolish and rebuild a pre-existing nonconforming single-family home. A written request was made to the board through the planning office to that matter to be continued to the next meeting, I believe our second meeting in July. Is that right, Andy? Or is it our first meeting in July? I know I asked you this earlier.
The 14th of July.
14th. Okay, so being sought to be continued to July 14th. I don't see that there's anyone, well, let me phrase it differently. Is there anyone here on behalf of the applicant who wishes to be heard, or may the board proceed on the papers? Hearing no response, the board can proceed on the request that's been submitted. Do we have a motion to approve the continuance?
This is Mr. Moore. I move to continue 468th Street, 2020-030 to our 7/14 meeting.
Mr. Shagnon will second that.
Okay, the motion's made by Mr. Moore and seconded by Mr. Shannon. Mr. Cameron,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Delisle,
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Shannon,
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. Though we only needed 5, we have 6 in the affirmative. The motion carries. Matter is continued to the meeting of July 14th. Thank you, members of the ZBA. That concludes our business for the hearing of June 23rd, 2020. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Mr. Cameron.
There you
Second,
go.
Mr. Swanton.
Motion's made by Mr. Cameron and seconded by Mr. Swanton. On the motion to adjourn, Mr. Cameron,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Delisle,
Yes.
Mr. Swanton,
Yes.
Mr. Shannon,
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. At 6 in the affirmative, motion carries and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Caitlin. Everyone, have a good evening. And
This is Mr. Cameron. Godspeed in the future. Great to work with you all.
Here, here.
Ed, pleasure.
Thanks, Ed.
Be
Bye.
around. I'll be watching.
we're gonna miss you.
Heckling. All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks, Rob. Rob, great job.
Yeah,
Thank you,
as
Ed.
well.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right, take care, everyone.